comes rum coming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over, over there, over there, over there. Send the word over.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in here today on the Veterans for Cannabis podcast. We're here with segment number 2 and CEO of Can America Brands, Dan Anglin. Dan, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm great, Josh. Thanks for having me back, and hopefully we can get some of this conversation accomplished and not wander too much.
You know what? Even if we do wander, we'll learn while we do it, right? So, Dan, we cut off on segment 1 about, policy development. What does it look like to build a law or put a bill forth in a House of Representatives and go through the Senate at the state level? Can you tell us what that process is, and how long does that typically take to get a law either changed, enacted, or taken off of the books?
Well, in the case of Colorado, it was a constitutional amendment, right? So, I mean, any of these states that treat their will of the people like the state of Colorado does, we're more constitutionally guaranteed to be in business as marijuana operators than gas stations and oil and gas and high tech. These other industries are not authorized by the Constitution of the state of Colorado to be in business like cannabis is. So, the work that was involved in that, I had absolutely nothing to do with any of the signature gathering or the campaigns or getting it passed. And kudos to, the Vicente Cederberg law firm, who really played, among many others, but Christian and I go way back here. And I know that Brian Fox and Christian Cederberg and the Marijuana Policy Project and other folks really worked hard to make this a majority pass will of the people law. Now, that said, that group then kind of takes a different role, and another group comes in, and the kind of group that comes in once an amendment is passed through a ballot measure,
right,
is the group of folks who try to educate and either promote or defeat good ideas or bad ideas on what the enabling legislation looks like. And you're on a time frame. Once it passes on the ballot, you only have one legislative session. In the state of Colorado, it's a 5-month session. It's very limited.
That's what I was going to ask, is what does that look like in Colorado?
It's 5 months every year, and sine die is sine die. If something is not heard by the time the Speaker of the House drops the gavel on sine die, Latin for last day or something along those lines, it just doesn't happen. And so when you have a ballot measure, there's no choice. Something has to pass to enable a constitutional measure, or a big giant lawsuit's coming through. So as you can imagine, that legislative session was primarily dominated by marijuana issues because there were very large groups with lots of money. In fact, I think today Sheldon Adelson passed away, who was a very, very rich man from Las Vegas. I think he built the Bellagio and other things. But what he's known for in the cannabis industry is funneling millions of dollars against legalization. His nephew died from a heroin overdose, and he hated all drugs and actually blamed marijuana more than heroin. And so he funded groups like Smart About Marijuana, SAM, and Smart Colorado, and others. And at one point, there were so many we couldn't even track them anymore. And they were very well funded, and they played the, what about the children, protect the children card on every single issue, and their claim was they were there to as the guardrails of safety, but they would get involved in everything, and they continue to do so. My hope is maybe their funding is negatively impacted with the passing of the single biggest funder. The second biggest funder is the Drug Treatment Centers of America, which is owned by the Mitt Romney family. And there's a couple of others, but these are people who make money off of marijuana being illegal. But Sheldon was primarily focused on, he hated it, and he had $300 billion or whatever. So as you can imagine, it was difficult. Everything about it was difficult. Everything was an argument. Everything was a very long, drawn out process for the facts, right? I mean, we've had cannabis available, on a black market commercial scale since well before I was alive, and everybody was pretending like this thing was just invented in 2011 when the measure passed. So it was frustrating. It was hard. It was difficult. Lots of arguments, and it quickly became clear that the enabling legislation was clearly not the end of policy development, and that the regulatory rule setting, because basically what the legislature does is kind of this punt where they say, well, here's the guardrails. This is what we want. Protect kids, this, that, and the other thing. But everything else we're going to put in the world of the enforcement division, which went under our Department of Revenue and the marijuana division. And they made all the rules. So, if people thought, we got this done on the ballot measure, they were wrong. If they thought we got this done on enabling legislation, they were wrong. And once we started the rulemaking process, it became very clear that at the end of every rulemaking process, we might have accomplished a couple things, but now there was 10,000 more things to figure out.
All right, so I want to ask you a question, a very clear, precise question on this. How do you feel about the incremental approach that oftentimes is how legislative sessions go, right? Where you get a little bit and leave a whole lot of it to the punt region, right? Do you feel that's good, bad, or are you indifferent on taking care of just small things and then we punt to take care of it another time on another day?
Well, since I'm no longer a lobbyist and I'm no longer earning a living on this being a never-ending thing, I find it extremely frustrating. But when I was part of, as a professional lobbyist, this was great. Job security. This issue will never end, and that means that I've got to be there for the meeting, or I've got to be on that working group, or write a letter in support of. I formed the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce in 2014. And it was one of multiple groups. We had the marijuana industry group. There was just so many groups. And but ours was primarily manufacturers with a couple of dispensaries. And the funny thing is all these other groups were so willing to just, ignore restrictions on manufacturers of infused products because they were so focused on growing and dispensaries. And it was short-sighted, but overall, I find the entire legalization process to be completely disingenuous on both sides, right? It's disingenuous to say that cannabis is harmful. It's really disingenuous to say we got to study it before we make it available. And there's probably lots of people on both sides who would yell at me for that. But at the end of the day, it's been being consumed. And there's been hundreds of good things for consumers, like testing, right? I helped create the testing requirements. I helped create the child-resistant packaging requirements. I think those were important at the start of all of this because nobody knew where it was going.
Right,
and at the end of the day, nobody actually knew what was in the nutrients and what was in all of the things, the additives during the cultivation process. And we've determined a number of things had to go. And testing helped make us more legitimate. It took 2.5 years to get the industry to agree with that, but it did. It made it more legitimate for people. Now, does that mean the amount of testing that's required in some states is reasonable? No,
No, right. We all know
there's
that.
certainly some testing that's just unreasonable and really has no bearing. But when we started this, we were talking about Eagle 20 and mallet, and showing the legislators the amount of Eagle 20 that's on the grapes and strawberries that you buy in every grocery store in America.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up backing off when we realized that the consumers were better off with products that were tested and benchmarks for procedures and methodologies. And all we really needed to do was create sample preparation and some standardization in the testing regime to be able to make it so that we could do business, right?
That's
and
right.
not just, have all these guardrails, because it is a business.
I'll tell you, Dan, just to hear you say that, I really appreciate the fact that you're honest, because a lot of times you'll get people on who are not honest in questions being asked. You gave a flat out, completely opposite answer on when you were a lobbyist and when you were not a lobbyist. I love that and appreciate that about you, brother. The fact that you can tell it straight and tell, look, it was beneficial for me back then, so I wanted it to go on forever because I was getting paid.
Yeah.
Now, on the other end of it, I see why everybody's so frustrated with the stupid political system, right? So I appreciate that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, and I also think that the disingenuous part is when we do these really strict medical marketplaces, because legislators claim that they're afraid of constituents getting upset with them for bringing cannabis into their neighborhoods. I mean, there's multiple reasons for cannabis use.
Yes.
And, medical reasons for cannabis use are 100% legitimate, especially for minors, and very specific medical, issues. But at the end of the day, the larger community is people who want to choose cannabis over alcohol. Listen, as veterans, with the 22 suicides a day, and how many of those are contributed by alcohol abuse, like in my mind, if we can get it to 20 a day just simply because cannabis is an option over alcohol and it's not a depressant, then we've started a change in the average American's life, because we've accepted that cannabis should be a substance that people should choose to use, whether it be for medical reasons or whether it be for personal choice.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that any use is medical use. That's the way I just view it, and I take that kind of libertarian-minded heart anyway. We shouldn't have things that are illegal in this country. People can police themselves. That's just me personally, but I believe in that. I believe that one life saved means that our job is worth it. No matter all the crap we go through, if we can reduce that 22 down to 21 because somebody had the choice to use cannabis. And you look at it, Dan, I think we've both seen the numbers, and I'll bring this up and post it on our website as well. But of the people who commit suicide from the veteran community, 75 to 85% of them are intoxicated with alcohol when they do it. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, alcohol's a depressant, right?
Right.
And abuse of alcohol is self-medicating. I think most people who are looking for intoxicants are, as you say, medicating for a purpose, whether it's self-medication or something. Right. And then, abuse of that becomes its own animal in and of itself. But
that's right.
I mean, for me, I'm that true libertarian that says it doesn't matter why I want to use it. Stay out of my fucking business.
That's right. Let me do
what I want to do. Right? So,
amen to that, brother. Yeah. Amen. Oh my goodness. You just mentioned the short and highly regulated markets. We've got Georgia here in where I'm sitting at right now in Warner Robins, that's now come out and said that 6 companies will get a license to cultivate medical cannabis. Dan, with your infinite experience in this industry from the get-go, from the beginning, basically, from the legalization standpoint, 6 licenses in a state that has, 10 or 12 million people in it. Does that make sense to you from a numbers standpoint?
Well, it creates a monopoly. And, none of my comments are meant to disparage the decisions of the state of Georgia.
Right, because they're already made, right?
They're already made. But I mean, you look at liquor licenses and livery licenses,